juliakeller.co.uk. And thank you for watching us again. So today we have a very special guest. I'm going to let him tell you more about himself. But first, I'm going to just introduce how all of this is going to relate to healthy aging, which I know about, because in reality, we have the choice of how we age. One of the things I learned while doing my master's recently is that the way that we lived up to now, up to whatever age you are, whether you're 60 or you're 40 or you're 20, the things that happened before. So the way you were born, what your mother's diet was when she was pregnant with you, even what she fed you in your first year, and even where you lived in your first year has so much to do with how you age and whether you age well and whether you don't age well. And so all of us come to this earth in a way armed with many things against us already to basically help us to not age well and to help us towards unhealthy aging, let's say. So what we do on this end to help ourselves towards a healthier way of growing old or growing young, as however you want to call it, is what we have the ability to change. And we really, really have this ability. And this ability isn't just about what you eat, which I talk about a lot as a nutritional therapist. It's not just about the way that you live, which I also talk about. So let's say your lifestyle, meaning exercise and things like that, exercise, meditation. So that's part of it too, which I also talk a lot about as also a naturopath and a hypnotherapist. But it goes beyond that into how you live your career and how you manage the things that happen in your life. And we will call those things transitions, because I have Declan here today, and Declan is an expert in helping people to manage transitions. He's going to introduce himself and how he came into being this kind of expert. But those transitions can be very stressful, and stress is something that is constantly linked to long-term aging and aging-related diseases. So I'm going to let Declan introduce himself and tell you more about that and about how he got into this area of helping people to manage transitions.
Okay, thank you. I'm Declan Barry. I have been working as a executive coach, business coach, a variety of those kind of terms for about the last 20 years. And for about another 20 before that, was working in various aspects of HR, often around high hazard chemical manufacture and things like that. So a mixture of being employed in a kind of corporate sense in a range of organizations, but essentially for the last number of years, working with individuals, working with organizations, working with teams. And throughout all of that, a recurrent, relentless part of that process has been supporting individuals, supporting teams, usually it's individuals, to deal with challenging, difficult, usually unwelcome situations.
One of the things that you brought up is, helping people to deal with these unwelcome, challenging situations. Yeah. Have you seen in the people that you help something that makes a big difference between how they, let's say, welcome the unwelcome situation? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a pretty consistent, it's a very consistent pattern. Where an individual has something done to them, or an organization has something done to them, or a business finds itself in crisis, whatever term you want to use, part of the anxiety, strain, pressure, difficulty that you can feel, that you can touch, that they're experiencing, is caused by a feeling of them not being in control. So humans tend to like one way or another being in control, even if they're relaxed. Their relaxation is based on a level of comfort around control. Where control is removed, where they lose their own sense of control, that's likely to become problematic, because it starts to take them into a space where they literally don't know what to do. They don't know how to bring it back to a place of stability. They don't know how to manage their anxiety. In a broader sense, if I'm working then with somebody in that kind of situation or context, one of the initial questions would be that says, well, what is this person's aims? What is this organization's aims? What were they trying to do before this happened anyway? and remarkably and consistently, the default setting is we tend to live in a fairly aimless context. So it doesn't mean you have to have your aims nailed onto some kind of piece of wood and nailed to the wall of your house or up on the entrance to it. That says, okay, we're doing this in order to. If I can sort this issue out, it enables me to. And what tends to happen is people lose, either never had sight of what that is, or lose sight of that because there's so much other stuff going on. So much of my involvement is essentially around enabling them individually or collectively to just distill it down into that kind of clarity.
That's a really, that's a really important thing that you just said, that, helping to people to distill what are their aims, because in reality, what you said is that people don't like to be out of control. But what if, somewhere in the back of their minds, they might be thinking, well, I actually don't want to be in this company for a really long time. But when that news comes that maybe the company is thinking the same thing, then they start to feel like, oh, well, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. But they might have long-term aims that are actually, well, actually, I want to start something of my own, or I want to retire, or I want to travel the world, or whatever it is, something that's not necessarily cohesive with what the company's after anyway. So when you help people to distill those aims, and to help figure out, okay, what are their aims as opposed to what the company's aims are, how is it that you help them towards a place where, let's say, both company and person are in line with wanting the same thing?
Okay, if we take it from the perspective of the individual, which is a lot of the work that I do, it's almost a case of parking company for a minute, or more than a minute, and saying, look, if we try and juggle both of these things at the same time, this is going to become a bit of a mess. So let's just, initial terms, everything starts with you and with me. Bring it back into that context where it's actually about the individual. And what typically surfaces in that place is that individuals aren't accustomed, aren't used to, aren't practiced at actually working out where do they want to be, because they have so many other things and other people that they have to take account of. So it's their partners, it's their kids, it's their parents, it's somebody. And this one that says, okay, so let me know, for a start over 10, where do you want to get to in all of this? What would you like to do? So having sorted this out, sorted in inverted commas, that will enable you to do what? And often what that says, what do you mean? Do what? And you say, well, this is your time, this is your space. This is about, again, looking after yourself, understanding what your needs are. And it all sounds very selfish at the start, but actually what it does is it says, well, you don't have to tell me what you think I want to hear. You don't have to tell me what you think you should be saying, because I'll just listen politely and say, yeah, but what about this and what about that? And where it gets down to fairly rapidly is, paraphrasing, I know that where I am isn't sustainable, but I am afraid, fearful, anxious of the consequence of doing something about that. Almost a kind of superstition that if I talk to you about doing this, it will make the worst thing happen. The fairies will die if I don't say I believe in fairies. And actually that says, okay, let's just calm it down, take it to a simple place, one sheet of A4, one flip chart, and say, what's important? What's important to you? And then that starts to delve into what other people would probably regard as well-being, health, mental health, emotional stuff, psychological stuff. That says, okay, that's not my particular end of the spectrum to actually navigate the detail of those brackets. Here are people who are much more equipped to do that than I am. My role in there is to actually help them to map out a way of dealing with the specifics, the issues, the anxieties around income, the anxieties around working somewhere else, all of those kind of ones. That says, okay, so how would you go about sorting another role? How would you actually navigate your way out of here? How do you get to a place where you have a plan? And plan isn't 14 pages. It says, well, the organization doesn't want you, or your boss doesn't want you, or your boss is deeply misogynistic, or any or all of the above. And a consequence of that is there's an opportunity to actually say, well, if you don't want me, this is, in blunt terms, this is what it's going to cost you, not just financially, but this is the deal. This is the compromise agreement, quite literally, that actually enables the organization, to get what it wanted, but also, more importantly, for the individual to say, this isn't win-lose on their part. This is actually win-win. You give them what they think they want, and it actually provides you with an opportunity to say, right, why don't I go and work with people that I value, that I trust, that respect me, all of those kind of things. Because typically when somebody's in that situation, you can go down the list and say, right, well, which of these characteristics are they not experiencing? Well, they're probably feeling less than valued. They probably have a set of expectations that have been raised and not met. Most people will have a pretty clear picture of what that looks like. And you say, okay, so if you don't want to continue doing that, would it be useful to map out how to do that? And it essentially works by taking something that appears extremely complicated and distilling it down into something that actually looks very simple. Sorry, simple. It's not simple, but it distills it down that says, okay, so that's what you'd like to do. Okay, how do we make that happen? How can we sort that? How can we deal with that? So I've very recently been doing exactly that with somebody who is in that opportunity, and it is an opportunity. He's actually saying, well, this is where these strands of behavior and everything else with this organization are going to. There's an opportunity here, and where it's got to is that says she's navigated through all that, has an agreement, and is greatly relieved, as in that says, okay, this opens the door to me going and doing not specifically what I want to do, as in I've always wanted to be an artist, but actually that says, well, it opens the door to going and doing other adjacent work, but not being stuck doing this for the next 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah, and what you said is just so true. Between it's about making that win-win. I think a lot of times, there's so much that you said that is so rings true from when I used to be in the corporate world as well, and when I work with people in the corporate world, that a lot of times it is just bad chemistry between a team, or between a person and a boss, or bad fit for that particular company. I mean, I remember I had one client that was incredibly stressed because the company she was working with was just not valuing her at all, and she kept getting into this like knocking heads. And eventually they let her go, and I was like, well, why are you surprised by this? Like, you didn't even want to work there. It just isn't the right fit for you at all. And there's tons of companies that would be thrilled to have somebody like her with such a big opinion and so much experience and so much knowledge. And she felt let down because the company that she didn't even want to be at let her go. And I was like, just look at this as a possibility. And in the end, she actually did, and went on to study what she wanted to study, which was a master's in this particular area. So everything turned out well, because of the money that they gave her. She was able to do that. But it's that whole, I was helping her with the stressful aspect of that transition. And it is, we tend to take it very personally when people say they don't want. So what I want to ask you next, I'm kind of jumping because there's so much more you can tell us about, how it works and what you do. And probably this would be a 2-3 hour interview otherwise. But what I want to ask you about next is to give advice to people. Let's say 3 to 5 step plan of what you would suggest they do if, let's say, they come upon a transition that they're not happy about. Now, in the age group that I work with, that's often something like menopause, because, nobody's happy about that, or just getting old. Getting old is a transition. Let's be honest, retiring. A lot of my clients have kind of just gone through that retirement phase where they've been either let out by their company because it's time to retire, or they kind of have no choice and they have to retire, or maybe they chose to retire but now are thinking, well, now I'm bored.
Yeah.
So all of these things are transitions. I mean, life is full of transitions. So how would you recommend people manage that to a way that leaves them healthy and lets them see it as an opportunity versus as a, let's say, horrible thing that happens to them?
Uh, Step one is um, the basic one of recognizing the situation. So whether they call it a transition or not is a detail, but actually that says this is a discontinuity. This isn't what I was expecting next. This, or I've reached a point where I have to quote retire. It says, okay, by and large, we're not equipped. We don't learn, we don't develop skills and practices as we're growing up to actually equip us to deal with those things. Education is
Mhm.
focused on content and issues like that, and to an extent, technical expertise, but it very rarely equips individuals to actually identify the context and say, if this is what's happening, and it is, and I acknowledge that it is, then basically what do I need to know? What do I need to have in my mind as I'm approaching it?
Mm.
So the old model that says we learn, then we change. What do I need to learn? And with whom can I learn that? From whom can I learn that and internalize that learning such that I'm equipped, better equipped to actually, having recognized the context, begin to frame a process or processes that give me a clarity that actually I can articulate to somebody else. And by that I mean is often if I'm talking to somebody in this kind of context, what will surface is that the first time that they've actually heard what they think is when they tell me.
Mhm.
So I'm not their therapist. I don't need to be, but it is the so that's how you verbalized it. That's how you verbalized it with somebody to whom you have no sense of obligation. So verbalizing things like that to family partners, etc., gets into a place that says, how do I tell them that? How do I tell them that says I have no idea how to deal with this?
So is that
Or
step two, verbalize the
well,
situation?
it is that one that says having recognized the situation is how do I verbalize it? How and verbalize is how do I get this down on a page? what what context, what resource, as in people, can I engage with who will credibly help me to do that? So again, if you need plumbing advice, you'll go to a plumber. If you need electrical advice, you'll go to an electrician. If you need engineering advice, you'll go to an engineer. It's
Mhm.
a fairly routine thing that says, I'd like to do this, but I need an architect.
Mhm.
Right. In this kind of context, there isn't a natural, this is who I have a conversation with. And it might even be 20 minutes of conversation. It's not a lifelong commitment, that in the purpose of which is to enable me to actually get clear in my mind and in my emotions where I am and where I need to get to. What are my anxieties? For example, what are the issues that are um, implicit in all of this? Implicit ones being particularly powerful because it says, well, I never wanted to address the issue of a major health crisis if it happened. I never wanted to address the issue of an elderly parent having to go into residential care. I never wanted to. So I've pushed all of those things to the periphery. Now that it's happening, who the hell can I talk to actually say, well, what are the practical issues associated with this? Because they're a good starter. But also then what are the profound emotional consequences of actually dealing with that? And the emotional ones are typically the ones that are most powerful, but also potentially most corrosive. Because if they're not being attended to or not being acknowledged and recognized, providing a solution to the problem is worse than meaningless, because the solution is an external kind of prescription. You should do this, you should do that, you need to do this, rather than saying, well, actually, until we've gotten to what are the systemic issues here, the one I wouldn't prescribe, but even if I was mad enough to try and do that, I wouldn't, because you'd say, the person needs to own it. They need to navigate their way through that. So verbalizing, if you take that as a label, is usually a cathartic, sorry, it's almost always a cathartic part of the process. Because they then say, so that's what I think, and more importantly, that's what I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So a huge amount of organizational process, corporate process, but just the world we live in is driven by a world that's shaped by thinking. So what I would describe as left brain process, and actually doesn't connect to right brain, particularly lower right brain stuff, which is in that area of emotion, feeling, and the whole limbic brain and our unconscious processes. The things that actually keep us safe, literally. So good
Mm-hmm.
drivers drive unconsciously.
So
If you're
the
driving,
instincts, basically.
yeah, but instinct is seen as something that's a bit spooky or a
Mm,
bit weird or a bit flaky, rather than saying that's what tells you whether this
mm.
railway carriage feels safe. That's what
Yeah.
tells you whether you're going to walk across this space. So if you trust it in these
Mm,
situations, why wouldn't you trust it somewhere else?
mhm.
The consequences are at least as profound. They may not be physically life-threatening, but they're threatening in all kinds of other ways. So
And actually, the way stress is defined, I mean, stress, when we talk about stress in naturopathy, we think of it as, it's the saber-toothed tiger that was there when you're sleeping with your family inside the cave, the saber-toothed tiger that comes trying to go inside the cave. It's the same. Stress feels the same way as that saber-toothed
yes,
tiger felt to our, caveman ancestors. It's not any different. The difference is that those days the stress would go away like this, because you would either be eaten and your family's gone, or you would chase the tiger out, or you would shoot him with your bow and arrow or whatever, or stab him with your spear. So the stress would be finished quickly, whereas now the stress is prolonged, and that's what our body doesn't know how to deal with. Our body
yes,
is used to the short term quick stress. It can deal with that. It can process that. That mobilizes us. We need that to make stuff happen. We need that to, go getter, to get rid of that tiger and to, get the job, whatever it is, get the client. We need that. But when it becomes chronic stress, where it's going on for years and years and years, you have this boss that's constantly looking over your shoulder, or the company that you feel you don't fit into, that um, you have imposter syndrome constantly when you go into work. That long-term stress, that's where our health issues start, and that's
yes,
where people start to get things like gastroenteritis and high cholesterol and high blood pressure, and even diabetes type 2. That's all insulin driven, and um, insulin has to do with stress because it's all cortisol driven. So it's a lot of things that our body's reacting to that then makes us sick, that then it is life or death, really, because it can kill us. Stress is
yes,
very much impacted in cancers, for example. And to be fair, every single one of us, it doesn't matter how stress free you think your life is, you have stress. Every single person has stress. So it's really just about how do you manage that stress, those transitions, all of that. So you have the step 2, which is,
mhm,
vocalize and think
yeah,
about, okay, it basically, what you're doing is you're acknowledging the situation, then you're saying, okay, what do I need to help me with the situation? So basically, you're taking the situation where you're out of control. Somebody's
yes,
telling you you're no longer wanted, or you're getting older, or you're going through an illness that you didn't expect, or you have an accident you didn't think you'd have, or your child has an accident,
yes,
or your child has a mental health issue, whatever it is. You have a situation where you're out of control, which most of life really is. If we think about how much we actually are in control, it's very little. So then what you're doing is you're taking the control back, and you're saying, okay, this situation is out of control, but I have control by deciding how I'm going to handle the situation. That's where your control really lies. It's like you're not going to let the saber-tooth tiger follow you for 3 hours and do nothing. You're going to take control and do something, either run away, hide, or stab the tiger.
yeah,
Something is going to happen. So this is our way of getting control back. So now you've taken control back by saying,
yeah,
okay, what do I need to do? I vocalized it. What do I need to do about it? What's
mhm.
step 3?
Step 3 is often, again, what appears to be very mundane and very, very unspectacular, is actually saying, what are the things that you can control? What are the things you can do something about? What are the things that are low key, unobtrusive, undramatic, but actually that says, well, you can choose to do that. And that's where it can get into the area of something that says, look, this is going to be difficult to sort in relation to the organization, your role, or whatever. But in the meantime, how are you, in broad terms, managing your time? So managing your time, are you actually working 24/7? Because essentially it's almost like a hamster wheel that says the person is believing that if they make themselves indispensable, or they do this or they do that, it will all, God is good, I will get looked after, something will intervene, somebody else will sort it for me. Rather than saying, well, all of those things may or may not be true. I'm not particularly bothered. But simple, again, I use those simple stuff. Containing the stuff that's causing the problem into its natural domain. So if it's work related, which for a lot of people is what it is, it says, okay, so what are you doing when you're not at work? How do you actually create and sustain firewalls? Is too dramatic a term, but a firewall between those two worlds, so that actually you are spending time with people who you like. You are spending time with people who value you. Ideally, you're not spending time with people who like you, who are actually consuming even more alcohol than you are. But actually, it is that categorization that says, what are you doing for relaxation? What are you doing for leisure? What are you doing in terms of exercise? And again,
The work-life balance, basically.
well, the complication in a work-life balance is that people actually assume that there is a place of balance, rather than saying it's not balanced. What you can do is assert quietly your ability to rebalance it in your favor rather than against you. So be quite selfish, but don't tell anybody. Just get on and do stuff. So it really doesn't much matter what the person's passion is for. It might be for swimming, or they may like cycling, or they may like running, or they may like playing chess. It doesn't have to be, in my terms, something dramatic. Probably better if it isn't. It's actually something that they've always liked doing, or it's tucked away in the background and it's got squeezed out. And the more obscure it is in my world, the better, because it's mainstream in theirs. It says, Jesus, I couldn't imagine ever doing that. The last thing I'd ever want to do is that, but they like it. They are good.
Would that be a step 4, kind of rebalance in
Yeah.
your favor?
Well, it's actually giving the person examples of things where they can do stuff. Sorry, do stuff means you decided. A good example is somebody decides they're a stone overweight, or whatever it happens to be. There's no dramatic public statement of I want to lose a stone in weight, for example. But it says, here is somebody who, when they're noticed 6 months later, 12 months later, 6 months later probably is a reasonable time. Says people say, yeah, he or she is a lot sharper, a lot in a lot better shape than they were. I don't remember how that happened. And part of it is that one that says, well, while they're in that category of literally looking after themselves, their ability and confidence around actually addressing the challenges to do with the context, that, as in work or domestic or relationship or whatever, is something that they have a much greater capacity to actually deal with. So if I'm dealing with somebody who is exhausted, weary, flat, depressed, and not depressed, but starter for 10 is, it says, like a flat battery, we need to get the battery back to a place where it actually has some charge coming into it. There's no point standing at a battery and saying, you need to do this. The battery's flat. You say, okay, we need to help to get the battery back to a place where it's actually able to do and discharge its function. And once it's at that point, then it's self-sustaining. It's in that model that says, surprise, surprise, this person has reduced their alcohol intake. There aren't that many people that I know these days who smoke, but it was a a major feature of the world for a huge number of people until not that long ago. Um, and and it is that one that says, yeah, this is somebody who quietly gets on with shaping an exercise regime or shaping a dietary process that isn't novel in the sense of it's a fad that they'll do for a month and then move on to the next fad. It's saying a consequence of being in that place is it actually enables them, back to this one of managing transition, they are physically in better shape to manage the demands of it. They're emotionally in better shape to manage it. And surprise, surprise, they then move through that process and come out the other end feeling, well, that was interesting. Not quite sure how that happened, but that all worked. Or it worked well enough, because often what will happen is that the outcome won't be some idealized place. It says, well, this is something that's actually significantly better than where we were before.
Sounds like you need to bring me in to talk to your clients while they're going through the transition to help them with the physical,
Yes.
getting back into physical shape and stress management shape. And
But there's a very consistent correlation that says, surprise, surprise, those people who, and it is a generic term, look after themselves.
Yeah.
And there's an implicit element in there that says, well, isn't that being selfish? If I look after myself, it says, well, until you look after yourself, you're not in any shape to look after anyone else.
I think that's what people struggle with, is they're always thinking, oh, but shouldn't I be, don't I need to work harder and put in more hours so my family can eat? And I always say, look, but if you now in a couple of days pass away from a stroke or a heart attack, your family's not gonna, you're not making it any easier for them. They need you alive. Take
Yes.
care of yourself, and then they'll be able to, go along with that. They'll be taken care of. It
So if
starts
I'm
with
working
us.
with somebody, sorry, if I'm working with somebody in that context, if you were listening and you'd regularly hear me say, look, just take that away and go and sleep on it.
Mm.
And they say, well, yeah, can't we resolve it now? I said, well, we could, but actually what I suggest you do is you take it away, think about it, let it soak, let it digest, literally sleep on it, and come back to me, continue the conversation. It will always be in a different place, always, always, always. And there's no, in my terms, there's nothing mystical about that. There's nothing magical about it. The tooth fairy hasn't done it, to my belief. But actually what you have is that one that says, right, this person actually is coming back to it refreshed. So again, I will typically check out, if I'm working with someone in that context, how many hours sleep they're getting. And I won't say you need to have X hours sleep.
They do
But
need to have X hours sleep. I can tell
but
you
I
what
will
the
never
X
tell them
hours
that.
is.
Yeah, but it is that one that says, I worked with a client some years back who was probably running on about 2 hours sleep a night.
So unhealthy.
And he used to ring me on his way into work in the morning at about 6 o'clock. And what I didn't tell him was, it says, look, I'm not getting out of bed to talk to you. We'll process all this stuff, but I'm going back to sleep at the end of our call.
Yeah.
And the value for him was he had spent much of the night processing all of that stuff. Yeah, cool. What does this man need? He needs to have a level of confidence that he has a framework and a plan that's going to navigate him through the day. In my terms, yeah, it's not causing me stress. My responsibility in there is always to help that person to actually address those issues in a way that gives them a sense of confidence that they have a degree of control over them. They might only have 1% degree of control, but often that's enough. This is believing they've got control will get them from one stepping stone to the next. A stepping stone model is fairly key. And if I go back to a kind of what would be a stage 5 or step 6 or whatever, 5
We're
would
on
be
step 6. Yeah, step 5.
yeah,
Yeah. So
take
if
your
we
pick.
say, okay, what is that step 5? Let's, can we kind of almost the
Yep.
final step? Would that be the final step, or are we working on a 6 or more step plan?
They morph a bit, but I wouldn't. I've only got 5 fingers or 4 fingers.
Yeah,
In the
let's say 5. Let's say step 5. I
6 is
usually
too
work with
many.
3s or 5s when I do my advice.
No, you almost get to yeah, big numbers are just too big.
Yeah.
So if we call it at 5, it's the what I would describe as stepping stones. So stepping stones are a very simple a model that most people understand that says the purpose of the stepping stone is to step onto it and to step off it again. This is not a destination. Standing on a stepping stone in the middle of a stream isn't where you want to be. You want to move with a degree of confidence from this one, moving your weight onto the next one, onto the next one, onto the next one. As in, there's a real sense of momentum, there's a real sense of direction. It would be useful to decide you wanted to get across the river or the stream rather than river. But the stepping stone only needs to support your weight long enough to move on to the next one. And a lot of anxiety is created by believing that I need a complete solution. I need to know everything. I need to have sorted everything. It says, you might like to and you might want to, but Jesus, that's exhausting. Lighten off the load a bit and actually say, this is good enough. This gets me through to there. This is an improvement. And what that tends to do is give the person, again, an increasing level of self-confidence. It says, oh, that worked. Yeah, that didn't work because Declan made it work, or whoever the other is. That worked because they did. In their terms, they did it for themselves. It therefore reduces and removes any sense of dependency. And therefore it is something that says, well, it worked in these examples and in these contexts, therefore it's your intellectual property. You wouldn't use that term, but it's their own stuff. That says, might that process, that approach work in relation to other things? Surprise, surprise. Yes, it does, because that works for them. Doesn't have to work for me. That works for them.
So can I say, if we kind of put it into layman's terms, if we say, okay, step 5, let's say the last step being, okay, knowing somewhere in there, they'll figure out what it is that they actually want. I think we did that early on. What do you want?
Yes.
So then I guess step 5 is kind of, okay, what do you want? You know what you want. What are the stepping stones from where you are now to where you want to be to help get you there? Little stepping stones. And once you kind of have figured out the little stepping stones, it doesn't feel like it's climbing this high tower, to reach Rapunzel kind of thing. It's more achievable.
It's mundanely practical. And the linked piece then is how can we help those that we, particularly those that we care about, but also those that we encounter, to navigate through that space.
Absolutely.
A lot of the problem, challenge, difficulty, pain is caused by a sense of isolation. The individual doesn't have a framework that gives them the confidence to actually deal with it. So it is quite literally putting an arm around somebody. It is actually just literally making time. So in that classic sense that says, who do we make time for? And it's recognizing that says making time for people enables them to have a conversation with us that actually in which they're talking to themselves. It happens the words are being verbalized to us. So one doesn't need to be a consultant or a specialist or anything. It's just simply that says, well, let's just go for a walk. That's literally, yeah. I recently did that with somebody that says we ended up going for a 3-hour walk. Wasn't in the plan. But in the course of the 3 hours, he unpacked 99.9% of what it was that actually needed to be attended to. But he didn't see himself as actually having to list a series of problems. And I got a 3-hour walk out of it. I thought this is cool. But
good exercise. Depends what the weather is, of course.
Well, it was a gorgeous night by the Thames, but it's that one of recognizing that when one does that for someone else, it actually then equips oneself to deal with it very selfishly for ourselves. So if somebody makes time for others, if they are non-judgmental, non-directive, all of those kind of good things, but actually just says, okay, would it be useful if, would it be helpful if? So they're asking really open kind of questions, very gentle kind of questions. And some of the questions aren't even heard as questions. They're just saying, okay, well, what would be useful? What would be helpful? By helping others to do that, it's not some kind of great, evangelical process, but actually it says, oh, that's right. That's interesting. that person actually then copes with those situations themselves far better, because actually they've given a degree of thought to it in the context of helping someone else.
Amazing. So that was amazing. That was so, you're so insightful, so many things to say. I think we might need a follow-up interview because you
You're
have so
welcome.
many things that you can tell people. Thank you so much for participating, and very, very useful to have this discussion because there's a very big fit between what your people that you're working with are going through and what, let's say, the people that I work with go through, because let's be honest, they all need to think about their health and they need to think about how to manage transition. So it kind of goes hand in hand, because health does suffer during transition management. Okay, so it's Declan Barry at mac.com. At the bottom. Thank you very much, Declan.
You're
Hopefully
welcome.
that all shows up in the chat. I'm going to stop the recording now.